For my final project, I'm going to be talking about major cities and their rivers. This project will be about Quito and its river, and I'll be doing a compare and contrast with Minneapolis and our river. This project is about how major cities affect rivers from both a science and a cultural perspective. For the science portion, I'll be talking about dams and their impacts on the water quality of that river. For example, the dam that we visited while we were at Pambolino. I'll also be talking about the St. Anthony Falls and what that means in Minneapolis. From the cultural perspective, I'll be talking about the indigenous populations. So in Ecuador, I'll be talking about the Quechua people. And of course, we learned about the highlands and the lowlands, and they're also living in the Amazon. We learned about the significance of water and the waterfall, or just natural resources in general, and how very important that is to their population. In Minnesota, I'll be talking about the Ojibwe people, and that is because they are fishermen and they rely on the water for their food, for example, wild rice and fish. So to their population, having clean water, good resources, that is essential to their way of life. To give an overview of both cities, I'm going to start out with Quito. The water source for that city is from 9 lakes in the Cayambe Coca Reserve. We actually visited this during our stay in Ecuador. Quito has a population of 2.7 million people living in that city. Just to lightly touch on the treatment of the water, it's treated twice. For sediment, chloride is added to it. It's oxygenized, and it's known as the best water quality in South America. Unfortunately, I also found online, according to the Ministry of Urban Development Housing, only 8% of the water is actually treated before being released back into rivers or lakes. In Minneapolis, our city is about 400,000 people, which is significantly smaller than Quito. Our water source is from the Mississippi River. We take water out of the river and release our water back into the river later on. It's a very long process of adding different chemicals such as chlorine, ammonia, and various other ones to help treat the taste and color. After using the water, it's actually released back into the Mississippi River itself after being cleaned with more chemicals and it being bleached. So if we know that naturally flowing water is actually the river or stream cleaning itself, is it really a good idea to put a dam in the way? Wouldn't that stop the flow of the river, which means that it will not be able to clean itself? That is exactly correct. While talking to Professor John, I learned that by stopping the water, you're actually stopping the flow and therefore stopping the natural cycle of the river cleaning itself. So what does all this mean if we put everything together and think about it from a science perspective? Now we're going to talk about Quito first. Well, we have a high population of 2.7 million people living in that city. We also have 92% of the water that goes untreated that is released back into the rivers, and these rivers flow downhill to other communities that need water. We also have dams in these rivers, so that means that the rivers will have high sediment levels. They won't be able to clean itself, like I mentioned earlier. It's much more polluted. There are many negative impacts on the ecosystems within this area. This may mean that organisms that live in the water, plants that live in the water, and everything else that depends on water. Now we're going to move on to Minneapolis. So we have about 400,000 people living in the city. The water is treated, but it all goes directly back to the Mississippi River. And keep in mind that the headwaters is actually in Minnesota, so this river flows all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, meaning that many more states will be using this water. We also have the same negative impacts that I talked about in Quito. And for our purpose, I'll only talk about the lower St. Anthony Falls Dam because there are many, many dams on the Mississippi River. We are also only going to talk about the dam as we did with the Ecuadorian dam. And that means just talking about the electricity that is being generated from that dam. So for the St. Anthony Falls, the lower dam, it only generates about 10 megawatts of electricity. So that means that it only generates 1/6 of what the Ecuadorian dam generates. Now we're going to go back to our question. We're going to answer the science portion. How does a major city affect rivers? The rivers have higher levels of pollution. In Quito, they're releasing their raw sewage directly into the rivers, and this impacts the river's health dramatically. In Minneapolis, although it is bleached and clean, it is still adding waste into the water, although less dramatically. With dams that are constructed, the river is unable to clean itself naturally, and again, this means that there are higher levels of sediment in the river, it's more polluted. There are many negative impacts on the ecosystems around that area, the ecosystems within that area, and anything and everything that depends on water. In conclusion, because of each city and their high population and the waste that they are generating, they are straining each of these rivers more than ever before. As an ESPM student, or environmental sciences policy and management student, it really breaks my heart to see this. To tell a personal story, one of my favorite days was actually visiting the dam. I thought it was very well put together because we were able to see the dam itself, talk about the electricity that was being generated, and we talked about the different negative impacts that the river had. Afterwards, we also visited the home of an American couple where they gave us a tour in the woods, and they also talked about how they had to move their house because of the dam. So to me, being able to see the dam itself, talking to these people, and realizing how dramatic their lives have changed because of a dam that was built to support a city's high population. It truly breaks my heart and really makes me see that in order to have a more successful future, to be an environmental manager, I have to be able to see these different views, different stakeholders, and to understand from their point of view while trying to find a solution that works best for everyone. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the indigenous people in each of these locations. With the new constitution in 2007, the Ecuadorian government is recognizing Mother Earth as, I quote, the right to exist, persist, maintain, and regenerate its vital cycles, structure, functions, and its processes in evolution. They also say that the government must take, I quote, precaution and restriction measures in all the activities that can lead to the extinction of species, the destruction of the ecosystems, or the permanent alteration of the natural cycles. The Quechua people and other indigenous groups have the right to protect Mother Earth through this Constitution. In the Constitution, it says the destruction of the ecosystems or the permanent alteration of the natural cycles. Now, if we go back to our river, remember talking about how the dams prevent the natural cycle of cleaning from happening. We also talk about how the different ecosystems may be impacted because of the environmental consequences of having the water stopped. Because the Quechua people have the constitutional right to protect Mother Earth, this dam, and how the people of Quito is using this water, it's a direct violation of the Constitution as well as the rights to these people, Mother Earth, and life. Outside of the Constitution, there are direct consequences to the actions of other people and to the environment that these people value. Similar to the Quechua people, the Ojibwe people and other natives that live in Minnesota continuously have to fight for their environmental rights. One example is the Winona Honor the Earth group that works on raising awareness with environmental issues within the Native community. In my past internship with Environment Minnesota, I was actually lucky enough to work with some of these people. They have a great saying that everyone knows, and that is, love water, not oil. And this has to do with the different issues that they work on, mainly oil pipelines and different companies that try to drill in Minnesota. Although the oil issue isn't directly linked to Minneapolis, it does have to do with bigger populations of people and their consumption of oil and energy. And this does bring up the issue of having the rights to getting that oil, and that has to do with Minneapolis and Minnesota as a whole. So now we go back to our question. How does major cities affect rivers from a science and cultural perspective? We've already answered the science portion. Now we're going to answer the cultural perspective. Unfortunately, this has a lot to do with law. However, talking a little bit about the Quechua people and the Ojibwe people, we see that there's a pattern of indigenous people having to fight for the right of the earth and their right to the land and the health of Mother Nature. And this has a lot to do with the higher population and the bigger cities and how they impact the rivers and their energy uses. To answer the question, major cities and populations have had a huge impact on cultural and indigenous people and their perspectives and beliefs. Now, just a few examples are the loss of sacred land, the loss of ecosystems and species, the loss of the right to the land. They also have to fight for Mother Nature, and I quote from Honor the Earth, to be a voice for those not heard.